Christ's College, Dublin, where he qualified in medicine in 1941. And after medical school and internship at the Mater, he trained in a number of specialised areas in Europe, Britain and the United States, ending up with a Rockefeller Foundation Scholarship and a World Health Organization Fellowship in 1964 in the US. To set the context, we must remember that when he was emerging on the medical scene here, the war was on, it was 1941, and then of course the post-war period after 45. In addition, there was still a TB epidemic raging in this area, particularly in this area around where the Mater and Jervis Street were, it was the inner city, and there was grinding poverty, slum dwelling. Many of the houses on this street were slums. So it was a particularly difficult time to emerge. He went through various developmental stages in his early consultant career because he was appointed very early in his career, and he initially focused on sort of social needs of the immediate environment of the hospital, which is very, very acute. He initially took an interest in cardiology, then respiratory medicine, and then eventually settled into being a gastroenterologist. He established a very large practice and was extremely well respected. He was an active participant in the college positions. He held nearly all of the officer positions in that body and was ultimately elected president in 1974. He was a very active administrator. He was, of course, on the board of the Medical Council here in the Mater. He was on the Mater board for life, ultimately as both an honour and a service to the board. He was on the board of St Vincent's Hospital, Fairview, St Luke's, St Anne's, Central Remedial Clinic. He was on Corlin and Hospital. It would be easier to say what he wasn't on, really, and what was available than what he was on. He had extensive interests outside of medicine and was a very multidimensional figure. That again would be a talk in itself, but suffice to say he was elected to Shannon Éireann on 2 occasions on the NUI panel. He was elected to Senate of the National University. He was Master of the Goldsmith Guild, I think, on 2 occasions. He was nominated by the National Gallery onto various bodies and had a huge interest in art, graphic art in particular, and antiquities. So very much a multidimensional figure. Thus, up to now, we can say he had a fairly wide-ranging and, I suppose, conventional though brilliant career. But there was much more to Brian than that. In another sense, he was a very truly remarkable man in terms of his professional vision and exceptionally forward-looking for his time, and indeed for any time. He was involved in the foundation of the Irish Cardiac Society, which may come as a surprise to people, in 1949. He had studied right heart catheterization at the Karolinska Institute in Sweden, and in fact the story goes that he brought back the first catheters in a suitcase from Sweden. And those catheters were put to use. He catheterized the first patient who ever had heart surgery in this hospital by Mr. Johnny Corcoran, and that was the first mitral valvotomy. And Brian and Johnny Corcoran did that. Of course, Corcoran was the surgeon. But it couldn't have been done without the right heart cath. And that must have been an extraordinary day if they did that. And of course, that foray into cardiology set the scene really for the Mater in many ways, because from that stemmed the development of the ICU, the HDU, the appointment of anaesthetists with a particular interest in open heart surgery, bypass surgery, pump technicians, development of the cardiac cath lab, and so on. So there were a lot of consequences that flowed from that interest in cardiology. In his own specialty of gastroenterology, he was of course very innovative. He was the first to bring back the Crosby capsule to Dublin, I think, and was certainly involved in early endoscopic work in gastroenterology. He was instrumental, and anybody who knows him will know that there's a lot of meaning behind the word instrumental. He was very much a manipulator of events. He was involved in the appointment of Dr. John Lennon as the first probably modern endoscopist in Mater and virtually in Dublin. And of course had a large part in setting up the lab which John subsequently worked in. He then was very quick to appoint John Crowe, Professor John Crowe, as a gastroenterologist, hepatologist. And as an interesting link to the present, having managed to get 2 gastroenterologists, he was the 3rd gastroenterologist. He suppressed his own post on his retirement, which maybe again is characteristic, and that post was turned into a respiratory post. That was my position when I joined Pat Keelan as the 2nd respiratory physician in the hospital. And that was very progressive of its time, the model that there would be 2 specialists in each department rather than the idea of solo specialists. He was instrumental in various other very significant appointments. He was the first to appoint an immunologist in the histopathology department, which was again innovative, unusual, and very groundbreaking. He was very instrumental in setting up a genetic service between Temple Street and the Mater, which was a very brave thing to do. You can imagine the ethical issues and so on that were bound to emerge in that situation. in Ireland in the 60s and 70s, setting up a genetic service. He gave tremendous support to the radiology department, which I think would be one of the jewels in his crown. It expanded from a very small traditional department, I think 2 or 3 radiologists, to a 14-man department and woman department right now. And he led in the use of the CT scan, the MRI scanner, and now, of course, he didn't see it, but the PET scanners. So he really has a huge legacy for him, that whole thing. And it would be true to say that it would be difficult to find any specialty in the hospital he didn't do something like that for. Not only in terms of helping develop it, but having the insight to develop it beyond sometimes the insights of the people who held the posts. So he was truly remarkable in his vision. He's also instrumental in setting up endowed UCD professorships in the early, I think in probably the 70s. The idea was that this would allow young consultants coming back to Ireland who had a research background to maintain that interest when they came back, so they would have some funding to allow them to do that. So it was an idea with obvious potential and huge potential value, at least, to the university, to the hospital, and to the whole community. Further evidence of that sort of research interest and academic interest in general was setting up the Mater Foundation to support research within the hospital. This research was socially based in the first instance, dealing with hypothermia amongst the elderly in the immediate catchment area, reflecting back to his earlier times when he had been involved in social parts of medicine in the 40s and 50s. And of course the Mater Foundation was also involved in breast screening initiatives, which has now flourished into a national movement almost. He was also a great supporter of James Connolly Memorial Hospital, which at that time was just emerging from its TB era and to its present status as a modern clinical centre. And indeed, himself and my own retired colleague, Dr. Pat Keelan, were 2 of the consultants who went out there, really, I think, more or less on their own time, to allow Connolly time to develop its own staff and its own expertise as a clinical centre outside of the TB era. So again, Brian gave very much of himself there, not just a planning role. He actually drove out there twice a week, as far as I know. Now, along with Dr. Freeman, he was also instrumental in setting up the Mater pools. And Dr. Freeman, of course, is another great figure of the Mater history. Brian was doing this when fundraising was in its infancy. It was a much more intensive and personal commitment from him, I think, than one would now associate with modern fundraising. And this was done by dint of weekends, late evenings, spent working for the Mater pools, that he raised literally millions of pounds. The monies went initially to support structures within the hospital, which initially was Freeman Auditorium and some laboratory space associated with that. And then, more pertinently with regard to today's event, he helped the sisters, and with their support, to buy up most of the properties around here, Leeson Street, what were derelict properties really, Leeson Street, Lea Street, Nelson Street. And this really safeguarded the hospital perimeter and allowed the development of the very building that we're in today. The UCD buildings, this building, the nursing centre across the street, the TB centre, the Neurology Institute, the professorial offices, the campus development centre, the IT centre. The list goes on. Neurology associated with cardiology. The whole street has been revitalised, and really it comes from the vision of the individuals with Brian very much involved in buying up these properties and ultimately raising some funds. And I think any of us working here really have to remember where these buildings came from and the process it took for them to develop to the level they are today. He was instrumental in developing the Mater private hospital and also in the development of Phase 1A across the street, and in a very real sense to the idea of Eccles Street as a campus, which has of course at last emerged from what he founded as really derelict, somewhat slum dwellings, low-tech private nursing home in a 19th century hospital. So we really have come a very long way from that. All of this he did with great good humour in my knowledge of him and enthusiasm. Nonetheless, I'm sure that it did take a personal and family toll, as his day started early with clinical responsibilities and ended with trips to the Department of Health, work on Mater pools and late night evenings, which I shared in his house in Temple Gardens. So he was an extremely hard worker. I really was familiar with Brian as a student and as a junior doctor, of course, but I didn't really know him until his retirement when I was appointed in 1984. He was still very active at that time. He was still on the board and very much an active player in the hospital politics. And when he became ill in the 1980s, I had the privilege of being his doctor and I hope his friend until he died in 1981. As I said at the outset, he was a distinguished physician and somebody who inherited many of his patients. I can attest to his clinical skill and regard that patients from all over the world and all over the country held him. And it's kind of fitting that that kind of clinical skill is what's now associated with him in this clinical science laboratory. And I no doubt that he would have loved the high-tech aspect of it and the entrepreneurial aspect of the developmental side of it. That was the kind of man he was. So to close, I think that sometimes we are a bit too quick, particularly in this country and in the current era, to label people as historic. But just remove 25 years since he retired, and as the area around the hospital blossoms from seeds that he planted, I think it isn't too early to say that Brian was a historic figure in the matter and Dublin medicine's history, and more importantly was a great man, a generous man, and a very kind man.